Shalom. I'm Naama Rue. This is my husband, Rabbi David Rue, coming to you from Israel. And we have been discussing the agricultural laws that apply to Jewish people in the land of Israel. What are we going to discuss today?
The next tractate is Trumot, which literally means those things that are elevated, they're given to the Cohanim to use, but they actually belong to God, as we'll see in a minute. We are not going to discuss the practical things at this point. In fact, we're going to skip all the practical things until we've discussed all of the tractates that deal with these things, and then we'll go back and discuss how practically we do these in our times. So there are several verses. The first one is in Deuteronomy 18:4. Reshit tegancha v'tiroshcha v'yitzarecha titen lo. The first of your grains, your grape juice, and your olive oil you will give to him, meaning to the priest. And the next verse is in two verses in Bamidbar, 18:8 and 18:12. V'ani, and I, hine netati lecha et mishmeret trumati. Behold, I have given to you the watch of my trumot, of those my elevated offerings. Kol chelev yitzar v'kol chelev tirosh v'dagan. All of the fat of the olive oil and the fat of the grape juice and grains. Reshit asher yitnu laHashem. The first will be given to God. Lecha natatim. I have given them to you. And in Vayikra and Leviticus it says, V'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. And all of these holy things, a stranger, meaning a non-priest, is not allowed to eat it. When we say it's kodesh, when it's sanctified, there are two things about that it means. Only Kohanim that are ritually pure are allowed to eat it. It is Mishulchan Gavoa Kazaku, that from the high table, meaning from God's table, it is given to the Kohanim to eat. They, their wives, their children, and so on. If it becomes impure, their animals can eat these things, but it doesn't belong to them. This will become important as we discuss other things later on. Now, from Torah law, any amount would be sufficient. So if I would take for an entire pile of grain, one single grain, and say this is the Trumah that goes to the Kohen, that would be fine. However, the rabbi said that there are three measures in terms of people that give Trumah. Someone that gives ba'ayin yafe, someone that gives with a nice eye, he gives 1/40th of the crop. Normal people give 1/50th, and normally, for instance, when the Rambam gives the general rules of this, he says a person gives 1/50th. Later on, he explains that there are different measures, but in general, when we talk about it, it's 1/50th, 2%. Or for someone that's a bit stingy, it's 1/60th. If someone says in general they're separating this, what's on the north side, for instance, of their pile of grain, it would be 1/50th on the north side, unless they're accustomed to give a different amount. If we know that they always give 1/40th or 1/60th, that would be an amount that we would take from the north side, and so on. There is an obligation to keep your produce pure until the point at which you separate the gifts from it. After that, if you want to make it impure, you can. There's no problem with that.
What do you mean by pure?
Ritually pure. It's contact with a dead body, contact with a dead insect, someone that they themselves has become ritually pure can defile these agricultural products. Now, from Torah law, we've only mentioned grains, grape juice, and olive oil. However, rabbinically, it's expanded to all types of fruits and vegetables that are normally grown as a food product, or things that may not normally be grown, but I planted it and I grew these things as a food product, even though most people don't eat it. So those things as well have these laws. In the land of Israel, there is from Torah law, we have to separate it. And Once these things have been separated, they can't be taken abroad. Also, you're not allowed to take food produce abroad until you have separated the gifts to the Cohanim and the Levim from it. So I believe this is why on the CRC's website, which we'll refer to later,
The CRC is the
Chicago Rabbinical Council,
Chicago.
they do not have a bracha for separating the Trumas Meisers, because if you're abroad, it should really never happen that you should properly separate Trumas Meisers, because nothing should leave Israel unless the Trumas Meisers have already been separated.
So if you're growing food outside of the land of Israel, you don't have to do these separations, and you say there's no bracha, meaning there's no blessing or no declaration of the separation.
Correct. The lands, as we discussed in the last lesson, the lands that are immediately around Israel have to separate from rabbinic law, but other places do not. And since you're not supposed to take tevel, produce that hasn't had things separated from it, outside of Israel, therefore, if you did, the separation isn't in the normal way, and therefore it does not have a bracha associated with it. But when separated in Israel, one should say the bracha for separating Trumas Meisros.
Is it an actual blessing or is it a declaration?
It is an actual blessing. Before you make the declaration of that this I'm separating for this I'm separating for that, and so on, you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed art thou, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who is sanctified with his commandments and commanded us, lahafrish trumot u'masrat, who has commanded us to separate the trumot u'masrat. If you're only separating truma, you would have only say lahafrish truma, and if you're only separating maser, it's lahafrish maser. If you're separating it all together, you can combine the bracha into one bracha.
Okay. So this applies today in the land of Israel, and outside of the land, it applies in that it's not implemented. Is that correct?
That never applied abroad. If for some reason improperly produce was taken out of Israel that had not yet had this Trumot Maasrot separate of it, one should separate those things.
Okay.
All right.
So this is why when I'm gardening, I have to do this process of separating this amount and designating it towards the priests. And then there's a practice that I have to carry it out. And I think that's something we're going to be trying to explain to people in another video.
Once we finish all of the theory, we'll go into the practical ways that it's done today.
Okay. Thank you.